Hey, church leaders, welcome to the Slingshot Group podcast. I'm your host, Tim Foote, CEO of Slingshot Group, where we build remarkable teams through staffing and coaching. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Matt Tresidder. Matt is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder at Leadr, a people development software on a mission to develop 1 million leaders. And as you listen to Matt, you'll hear his passion about healthy leaders and healthy teams, which equals remarkable teams, which is what we're all about, helping you lead. Can't wait for you to hear this. Let's jump in. Well, Matt, great to have you on the Slingshot Group podcast today. And this is going to be a fun one, extra fun, because, of course, we're both in the USA, but it's going to be the battle of the accents, right, Matt?
Battle. Yeah, there's an elephant in the room for sure.
Oh,
yeah.
A big elephant. You've got one Australian accent and one...
Kiwi.
It's a Kiwi accent.
Kiwi.
So listeners, that would be New Zealand.
Yes, sir.
And so we might need to get some comments in the chat about which accent you prefer. We just want you to realize that they're different, right, Matt?
Yeah, that's the key. This is almost like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And so there's a... Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with you about which is which, but I do want to find out how you ended up in the US.
Right. I think when I escaped was about 10 years ago. And have you talked much on your podcast about OE, like the overseas experience?
No, I haven't. Please open the account on that. Okay.
So a classic thing that Kiwis and Aussies do when they've finished high school is instead of jumping straight into college, it's like, hey, I'm going to go and see the world for a year. A gap year is the typical term, but an OE or an overseas experience. Is what we would
walkabout for the Aussies.
A walkabout, that's right. The challenge is, and you would know this term, most people don't go back home. And so
yeah, that's right.
I got a taste during my walkabout after high school. I went back home for a few more years, but then after that, I had so much of a taste, I thought I'd just leave forever. So I was 23 when I left New Zealand, and now the US is home. I love it.
Yeah, well, Matt, you're a remarkable leader, and the more I get to know you, you're a remarkable person. And you listeners will hopefully recognize how you say Tim and not Tim, and they say Tim. So, yeah, all of that stuff. You'll be recognizing that. But Matt, what a journey to end you up as Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of a great organization like Leadr. Obviously, you are passionate about building and growing healthy leaders and remarkable teams, which is our passion at Slingshot too. What sparked that in you?
And the inception of the idea was helping myself. Right. It's, I think if we look back on our journeys and think, how did we get here? And the shoulders of giants that we're standing on to get where we are today. Yes. And we think about those that went before us, those that coached us, those that discipled us, those that led us, and think about how we wouldn't be here have we hadn't had someone sit us down and give us difficult feedback, or spend the time to mentor us, or spend the time over a coffee to encourage us and inspire us. And I think, how do we systematize that idea of coaching, development, discipleship, if you will? And so it's almost like, hey, if I could go back and do it again, how would I bottle up all that I experienced in my growth trajectory and put that into one playbook, if you will? And so for me, it was, okay, I'm going to go through this hypergrowth season again. How do I do it healthy this time? Was kind of the convicting idea. Is I want to be healthier at the end of this journey than I was when I started. And so then I was like, okay, well, what would it look like to bottle this up and then package it to the next Matt that's coming along? And so that was kind of the first idea. Honestly, it was a bit of a selfish one. It's like, well, I think I can do better next time. And how would I bottle that up in some software? So that was actually the first thought. It was, I need this, my team needs this. And then lo and behold, other people are benefiting too.
It's really interesting, Matt. As I've grown older in my leadership, not old. It's made me realize that actually doing that, like you say, bottling what you've learned and then investing it in the next generation of leaders, that's truly an eternal investment.
Yes.
Because I look at the mentors that did that for me, and they talk about the mentors that did that for them. Can you share with us a little bit about your journey in founding Leadr?
Yeah. So the last company I was a part of was a company called PushPay. It was a tech company out in New Zealand. I joined them as employee number 5. So it was pretty early on. We worked in a tiny little office space above a gym in West Auckland, New Zealand. And their mission was unleashing generosity. They wanted to make giving so easy. They invented a mobile app. They wanted to make giving so easy that more people would give, and they would give more frequently. And the moment that I heard the vision, I was like, I need to be a part of that team. So I forced my way in the door. Chris Heaslip was the CEO at the time. I just basically told Chris he had to hire me whether he wanted me or not. And my journey was almost a textbook sort of case study for growing pains. So like I mentioned, employee number 5. If you fast forward the clock about 5 years, we had about 450 staff. So I went from a team of 1 to a team of about 150. I'm 27-year-old VP of sales, 150 people on my team. No one's really given me, I mean, I've read every John Maxwell book under the sun, but there's no book on what is a 27-year-old Kiwi who's never graduated from college or high school, by the way, and what do they do when they're leading a team? That Bible doesn't exist. And so through that journey, through me learning how to lead myself, which is already a pain in the butt, I'm a very challenging, difficult person to lead. Then leading your first team, then leading a team of teams, and then leading leaders was a journey filled with maybe not regret, but certainly if I could go back and do it again, how I would have changed my approach and changed my style. So that was that journey. And if I look back on it, it's okay, I want to build some software that would have helped me maybe be a more effective coach. That really was it.
It's interesting, Matt, as you're talking about push pay in Auckland. Did you say a garage above a garage or something like that?
Above a gym, yeah.
Yeah, it's being from Australia and doing ministry in Australia, you being in New Zealand in a tougher culture to push things like mission forward, and also discipleship, because we know that giving is part of discipleship.
Yes.
How much do you think those tougher cultures played into the scrappiness of your leadership and starting things and pushing things forward?
I actually never thought about it that way, because you don't know any different. But looking back on it, and I think you'll resonate with this, there's not a strong push and drive for entrepreneurship down under. It's almost, so I'm sure you've talked about the tall poppy syndrome. And
I haven't on this podcast, so it'd be interesting for you to bring that one up too.
Well, let me share the Kiwi version, then I'd love to hear how it's interpreted on your side of the ditch. So in New Zealand, the tall poppy syndrome, poppy being a flower, if you look across a sea of flowers, there's one that rises above the rest. And the tall poppy syndrome is you cut that flower down so they're on the same level as everybody else. So excellence, try to do something special, try to do something different. That's not celebrated. That's actually frowned upon. And so things like the national rugby team, when the captain has an amazing year, the salary of what he makes is on the front page of the New Zealand Herald, and he's demonized for it. Why did he give it all to charity? Yada, yada, yada. And so it's not like overtly anyone came out to me and said, oh, you shouldn't be doing the startup thing. You shouldn't be, trying to unleash generosity. You shouldn't be trying to find a way to make the kingdom resourced. No one overtly comes out and says that, but there's a lot of passive aggressive comments. And so I think it does iron sharpens iron in a sense. I mean, I developed a chip on my shoulder of just, I'm going to prove you're all wrong, right? So maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was just those side comments and thinking to myself, I'm just going to prove you all wrong. And I wondered, had we been over here where success and excellence and ambition and drive are things that are celebrated, I wonder maybe if I hadn't had the same experience. I'm really curious about that. I'm not sure.
I think capitalism has something to do with it, because I know that you probably felt this when you stepped onto US soil for the first time and got to know people, and that can-do attitude, which is so infectious. In Australia, there's a term, the little Aussie battler, and it's the Aussie that works really hard to get what they get. And it's amazing the talent exports from Australia and New Zealand, because I think we get honed in a much more difficult environment. Yes, the tall poppy syndrome is absolutely real in Australia, and people will be less encouraging. But I think what you do get is an authenticity. There's an authenticity about our joint cultures. Now we're saying really nice things about both countries here.
Which is weird. This is the first podcast that's ever happened.
We just won't talk about sport,
no,
because our teams are better. But there's an authenticity that you get, and for that really shapes your leadership,
right.
I think.
And underdog. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably part of your unfair advantage, Matt,
Yeah.
in what you've done and what you've achieved. And
Mhm.
what you and the team are doing at Leadr is such important work. And
Mhm.
I know we've both seen examples of effective teams where leaders are growing and teams are thriving. It's always great to walk into those environments. But we've
Mhm.
also seen plenty of places where culture is a mess. Leaders aren't leading. We've seen a lot of those environments. What are the trends that you're seeing from organizations that are growing leaders right now? What are they doing that others are not doing?
Uh, you hit the nail on the head on the meta trend, which is healthy leader, healthy team, unhealthy leader, unhealthy team. And no matter what industry, what space you're in, what country you're in, it's the same thing. If you're a staff team or a volunteer team, healthy leader, healthy team every time. And I think the cliched answer is the healthy leaders are the ones that lead themselves first. I think we have to start there. And so no one wants to follow an unhealthy leader, right? You've never aspired to grow up and be like someone when you didn't think to yourself, I want to have their life when I get into their stage of life. You never think to yourself, oh, that person's got unhealthy or toxic relationships. I can't wait to grow up and be like them one day. Those thoughts don't cross our minds. So I think it certainly starts with leading ourselves. But, and we were touching on this a little bit before we started, Tim, I would say it's despite the fact that we're busier than we've ever been, we have less time than we've ever been, and our schedules are more chaotic than they've ever been. It's the leaders that make the time for people, and it's the leaders that take the time to care and coach and develop their people that are going to stand themselves out. So the philosophy, the thesis that we're driving is management is archaic and obsolete. Leadership is the only way forward. And the difference between the two is leadership is developing in the coaching side, and the management is purely focused on outcomes and performance. And there's a distinguishment there. And so, yes, start by leading yourself, but also focus on the person in regards to, don't just focus on the projects that you can get from the person, if that makes sense. And so I think that's the first point to start on is, how are we approaching the way that we're leading and caring for our people? Or are we just thinking about the outcomes that they're going to produce for us? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Along those lines, Matt, what would you say would be the number one quality of a healthy leader?
It's an underrated attribute, but it's consistency.
Right. Talk more about that.
So I once worked for a leader who was very unpredictable. And so you could almost tell what sort of day you were going to have by their disposition when they walked into the office that day. So we all know these people. Let's not say names, Tim. But they would walk in and you would tell based on their energy, based on how withdrawn or extroverted they were, that was how you were going to be treated that day. And so they would have high highs and low lows. And you knew that the high highs day or the low lows day was going to be filled with erraticism, just like unpredictableness. I'm not sure any other. It creates a sense of anxiety. It's like, what version of Matt am I getting today when you're the peak of the mountain one day, but you're in the lowest valley the next? So I think consistency, it's the least sexy attribute that we ever talk about, but it's so underrated. I want a leader that can weather the storm. I want a leader that, despite the challenges, is going to be steadfast. I want to work with folks that, despite the chaos, that they're calm in the midst of that. And I just think it's an underrated attribute. And I think those leaders are the ones that stand the test of time. I certainly know the people that I look up to the most have been through the most challenging, horrific moments in life, but yet they're still optimistic. They're still so hopeful for the future. So those are the folks that I glean the most from.
That's really insightful, Matt. Have you developed yet at Leadr a consistency assessment?
Probably because I'm afraid of what I would say about my own leadership if I didn't. But we have aspects of that. So one thing that we think is a key measurable aspect of consistent leadership is whether you have one-on-ones with your employees or not, one-on-ones with your staff. And so we see very clear data trends of managers, leaders that have one-on-ones consistently and those that don't.
Right.
And the message that it sends to your team when you cancel, reschedule, rain check, don't turn up, arrive late, leave early, there's very consistent data points from Gallup and trends that we see in stories we hear from our customers about consistent one-on-ones as an example. So yes and no.
I've learned in my own leadership, Matt, that one-on-ones are the most powerful tool that I have with my key leaders, because you can be in a team environment receiving very tough feedback, and it's so important, I've learned as a leader, to allow for that very honest, candid feedback, and the place to respond to that is never in those meetings.
Right.
It's in the one-on-ones. And so I think that's such a powerful tool. Another consistent thing we're seeing in the organizations we connect with is the challenge around hiring. Now, Matt, hiring has never been easy. There are hundreds of things to consider anytime you build your team and hire new leaders. We see it all the time.
Right.
We find it's often the tendency of the organizations to want to only focus on hiring finished products, if you like.
Right.
Now, of course, there are many times where a long track record of leadership and experience is essential, but many times in many roles that may not be essential. And one of the things we're talking a lot about internally at Slingshot right now is that the best leaders are actually built, not bought. The best leaders are actually built, not bought. Now, there's different skill levels that are needed in different roles to build upon. But what are your thoughts on this from what you've seen? Are the best leaders built or bought?
Oof, I love it. You need to write a book on this. It's so good. I mean, we talk about the 4 C's, your character, your culture, your competency, and the chemistry.
Yep.
And one of those things can certainly be trained and equipped over time, and that's the competency aspect. Chemistry, you can't manufacture. If you're not going to get along in an interview, you're not going to get along when they join the team. Culture is something that people can buy into. So that's one that there can be a wow, I've never worked or been in an environment like this. Now I get an opportunity to live up to those standards, as opposed to falling into previous cultures where maybe it was negative or gossipy. So people can rise to the standards of new culture. And then character, like you say, I think that's something you need a track record to prove that you can stand the test of time. But what's the saying that your past is a predicator of your future success? And I think if there's been flaws, chinks in the armor of your character, I think that's something that would carry more weight to me as I'm hiring, especially a key position, over competency.
Yeah, it's interesting with the C's. We often use that too in the staffing process, and the calling piece is why our number one value at Slingshot is to be spirit-led.
Right.
And it's why we church search and ministry search is such a deeper process than marketplace, because calling has so many intangibles that are spiritually based and requires so much deep digging. But we'll often say when a candidate's about to go on a site visit, when the search is narrowing down, hey, pay attention to calling, because that's what's going to keep you there on the days you want to quit. And pay attention to chemistry, because these are the people that you're going to be doing life with day in and day out. We talk a lot. I'm going to go back to something from earlier in our conversation, Matt. You were talking about dysfunction and toxicity in leadership.
Right.
We talk a lot about the difference between dysfunction and toxicity. And I'll often say to our team, hey, if we don't work with dysfunctional ministries, we won't work with anyone. I mean, we have our own dysfunction.
Sure.
The issues are when dysfunction turns into toxicity. What would you have to say around that?
My first thought as you shared that was, I wonder if through our own eyes it looks like dysfunction, but I wonder if through our people eyes it looks like toxicity.
Interesting.
So, an example, let's go back to one-on-ones. Well, I'm just not very organized. Matt, I'm kind of a little bit all over the place. I have undiagnosed ADHD. Leaders, we hear these comments all the time. We kind of, we create humor to minimize our dysfunction. Oh, I've got a lot on my plate. Oh, there's so many things I have to do. So I'm just, this week I'm going to skip catching up with Billy, skip catching up with Susie. They'll be fine. So for us, that feels like dysfunction. So let's look at it from Billy or Susie's perspective. Every week, Matt is joking away the fact that he's so busy that he doesn't make time for me. Is that dysfunction? Maybe in the first or second week it is. But 2 or 3 months go by and your leader doesn't have time for you. Your leader doesn't take the time to give you feedback. Your leader doesn't take the time to sit down with you and have a really difficult discussion, to your point earlier about bringing it into a proper environment.
Right.
So I wonder if dysfunction over time actually quickly turns into toxicity, even if the leader doesn't think it. Here's another thought on this. I have a really hard time believing that the majority of toxic leaders are malicious people. I think I want to meet the person that wakes up every day thinking to themselves, I want to make my team hate me today. I want to meet that person because I don't think they're out there. I really don't think there's a pastor on the planet that thinks to themselves, I want to create an unhealthy, toxic culture.
Right.
They don't exist. But what does exist is a lack of intentionality. What does exist is is maybe dysfunctional habits. And so I think it's the degradation of that dysfunction that easily turns into toxicity. And I don't think anyone intends it to do it that way.
Matt, what's the best way today for leaders listening to check whether their dysfunction has drifted towards toxicity?
Peer accountability is my least favorite answer to that. Least favorite in the sense of no one likes being called out by their peers, but favorite answer in the way of when it happens, you'll probably never do it again. So I'll share an example about a quick story about this. We've just launched a partnership with the Table Group and Patrick Lencioni, and a lot of the work and a lot of the teachings that Pat has is around this idea of peer accountability. And so they'll say things like, don't take things offline. Taking things offline actually creates more dysfunction. And they'll say, don't have meetings after the meeting. Bring it into the meeting. Have the conflict within the meeting. So our executive team has really bought into this idea of, okay, let's have healthy conflict within a team environment. And so I know one thing about myself, and my team knows this as well, is I'm an ideas person and I'm a galvanizer. So I want to galvanize you around my ideas, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise. But when it comes to implementing those ideas and are those things happening, I check out because it's just too much energy for me. The details, I don't really want to get involved in that. And so I'll check out. And so people on my executive team in our leadership team meetings will say to me, hey, Matt, you're doing that thing again. You're checking out. It's not rude. It's not abrasive. It's not dishonoring, but it makes me better. And so those moments, I need them to check me because I know that I'm checking out and I think I'm so good at acting that people won't catch it, but they catch it. So I think it's either that peer accountability or it's the old boring habit, I suppose, of just asking for feedback on a regular basis. Hey, tell me what I'm doing. Tell me my blind spots. What are my gaps? And giving people an opportunity to speak into that.
That's helpful. Let's go to another part of the hiring process. When bringing new leaders into an organization, we know a ton of pivotal things happen in the first 90 days. This is why we've been focusing at Slingshot lately of that first process. You know, we're offering this supervisor self-led first 90 days coaching resource with every placement to help leaders start well and stay well. We know that's so important. What are some of the things you're learning and seeing about helping a leader start well and stay well?
Start well and stay well. So starting well, our onboarding week starts with core values. And if you're not doing that, I would highly encourage you in that first 5 days, share the mission, the values, the expectations, the behavioral norms, whatever you want to call it. Have a very clear onboarding path for that. Ours is as simple as we've got 5 videos recorded. You watch them Monday through Friday. You respond to the learning assignment with your thoughts and questions and give us your feedback and create a moment to buy in. I think we all suffer from some version of curse of knowledge, which is, well, I talked about this at a staff meeting a year ago. Why isn't everybody doing it? Like, I don't understand. We talked about this, and then you realize, wait a second, half the team has been here a year. They weren't even here for that initial talk. And so the curse of knowledge is assuming that everybody else has the same level of context and knowledge that you have. And I think we fall into that trap easily with new hire onboarding. So it's that chief reminding officer idea, right? Our job as leaders is to remind over and over and over again, and that starts in the very first week. And so I think that's the best way for someone joining the team is create that moment and allow them to buy in by sharing the same level of context that everybody else has had and not assuming that they're just going to jump on board because they saw your values on a wall. That would be the biggest one to me. And then on the stay side, I think it's repeating them over and over and over again, as boring as that might sound.
How many organizations do you see that neglect the first 90 days process, that onboarding process?
I'm not sure if it's neglected, more so than it's, I think more often it hasn't been revisited in a while. I think we put a process in place, but we haven't gone back and looked at it in a couple of years, and we just assume it's probably still working when I bet it's not. I bet it's not fresh, and maybe hasn't even been updated with that new brand and the new logo you rolled out last year. And so I think it just becomes an afterthought for us of, oh, remember that one time we put together our HR checklist for all new hire onboarding, and then I don't think we revisit it often enough. So I would say it was probably great when you rolled it out. It might need another look.
It's why you need a chief reminder officer, right?
Yeah, there you go.
These are living, active processes that need to always be looked at.
And do you know what's funny, Tim? I never went through onboarding at Leadr. Did you go through onboarding at Slingshot?
No.
No, there wasn't one, right?
Well, and there was there was 2 of you, and there was probably 5 of us.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's the tyranny of growth. I mean, growth is an opportunity and a threat.
That's exactly
and the
right.
amount of systems and processes that now that we have 65 of us,
right?
It's a different day, and you've got to build all these things.
Yeah. So I would one day, and I was just about to catch myself because I was going to say I don't have the time to do this. Classic. But wouldn't it be fun if you and I went through our own new hire onboarding? I bet we'd walk away from that going, that was trash. We got to do so much better.
That's right. We do send cookies or a cake or something.
Yeah.
Because we're a virtual company. I think that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'd like the cookies.
Yeah, me too. I never got my Leadr hoodie when I joined, so I'm still a little bit resentful about that.
I can see my address. I wouldn't mind a Leadr hoodie.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. So, Matt, we know that there's been a huge infusion of new leaders stepping into leadership roles for the first time in the last several years, because we had the big quit, the great resignation, the candidate crisis, all of that.
Right.
What are some more things that you could offer, some top priorities a leader should do to develop each member of their team?
So good. Well, first thought is recognizing that people aren't equipped when they step into leadership. So Gallup says that 9 out of 10 managers raise their hand and say, I don't know what I'm doing in their first 90 days of leadership. 9 out of 10 say, I don't know what to do. But when I think about that statistic, I wonder how many of those 9 people raised their hand to their upline, to their leader, and said, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I bet maybe one of them, probably none of them, because we don't want to raise our hand and say, and show weakness or show there's so much pride wrapped up in that, right? And so I think the first point is recognizing, hey, they're probably drowning, they're probably underwater, and we need to give them a helping hand. So my advice to them would be, embrace the imposter syndrome. Don't run from it. Like as much as you think that your boss has got it all together, your pastor's got it all together, they probably don't. All of us are struggling with some version of that, and so you belong. You have a seat at the table. That would be my big piece of encouragement if you're stepping into that in the first place, is don't think for a second that you need to opt out because you're not qualified. I mean, I have so many hot takes on that. I don't feel qualified for the role. I could go on that all day, but that would be my first piece, is just like, you belong, you deserve a seat at the table. Beyond that, I'm a big believer in self-taught. So I read copious amounts of leadership books. The more practical ones based on stories, like I love 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Talk about healthy conflict, but nothing beats a stretch project. Nothing beats signing yourself up and volunteering yourself for something you don't want to do. So practically, I would say to this new leader, I would say, what is giving you butterflies at the moment? What's the thing that if someone asked you to do it a week from now, you would stay up at night and give you cold sweats and you couldn't sleep? Whether that's public speaking or working on a budget or having a performance conversation or hiring or firing somebody, find that thing and then volunteer for it and do it. Like it sounds terrible, but it's the only way to get better, is kind of suck your way to the top. I'm sorry to tell you that.
That's great advice. I had a mentor that would always say, and I've said this before on the podcast, if you want to grow, go new places, meet new people. We did that. I mean, we went to the other side of the world. That was a new place with lots of new people. And then also learn a new skill. Like he used to challenge some of us. What are you learning that's going to be new next year? What's a new skill that you're going to be learning? So that's a really good reminder. You made the bold claim, I think, earlier in this conversation, but it's also the title of your book, Matt, that management is dead. The emerging generation of leaders do not want to be managed. They want to be developed. Talk more about easy ways for leaders listening today to start shifting from management to development.
When you walk into our office, the first thing you're going to see on the wall is people want to be led and developed, not managed. And at the root of that is we've got this younger generation coming into the workforce that wants to work hard, that wants to do, that wants to produce their very best work, but they want it attached to meaning. And what they don't want is that sort of ivory tower leader kind of standing over them from their corner office, telling them what they should do and not living it out themselves. And so that's really the sentiment behind what we're really trying to flip its head in the workforce, is ensuring that employees have their place and they're going to get coached there. They're not going to get managed there. So my advice would be, we've already talked about one-on-ones. I think that's a huge part of it. Secondarily would be goals. Don't create a set and forget goal culture. Ensure that it's front and center on a regular basis. People know how they're tracking. We've touched on feedback. That's a huge part of what we preach, is ensuring that everybody knows where they stand and ensuring that your blind spots are being discussed. And then it would be as simple as, does everyone have a growth track, a development plan? What is the things that I'm focused on, and what are the things, where am I going next? What's my best next step? And then I would say some version of coaching, learning, development. What am I reading? What am I watching? What blog am I listening to? What podcast am I checking out? And not just kind of falling into apathy, not falling into complacency.
Yeah, that's great, Matt. I was with a group of executive pastors recently, and one of the biggest needs they expressed is people stepping into leadership roles. I won't say management roles, leadership roles for the first time in the church space that didn't have leadership experience. And you've already touched on this. Admitting that you don't know is actually a strength, not a weakness.
Right.
I know who it was that said that the quality of your questions determines the quality of your ministry, the quality of your life, the quality of your marriage, if we want to get personal. It's like, how can I be better at this? How can I do better at this? So many people spend a lot of time trying to earn their place at the table when they're actually already at the table.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, how can I do this better? Any other advice you'd have for leaders in the church space stepping into leadership roles for the first time?
First of all, thank you for sharing that. So when people, especially in the church world, so I've got a friend of mine, he's a pastor, and no one's ever had to have a tough conversation with him, because he was in youth ministry, then he was in young adults ministry. Now he leads one of the campuses, and the dude's a legend, like an absolute legend. And no one's had to sit him down before and say, hey, you got to work on your dress code. Hey, you smell a little bit. Work on your BO. Like, no one's ever had to have those conversations with him. And now he's a pastor. He finds himself having these conversations all the time, but they were never modeled for him because he was never in that room. And so I think that first step is being like, yeah, when you're on the other side of it and now you're actually pastoring, leading people, you're having to have conversations that have never been modeled for you. So you lose nothing by going to your leader and saying, hey, I need you to role play this with me. I need you to practice this out with me. I need you to give me a talk track or practice it, because it's never been modeled for me. And I think that's so common that there's something called the Peter principle, that people get promoted or rise to the level of their incompetence. And the thought there being, if you're competent at something, you promote a high performer into management, but now they're all of a sudden in a room where they're a low performer, and they've never had to do that before. And so again, I love this idea of vulnerability and people saying like, hey, you're not going to lose respect. I don't know about you, Sam. The people that I respect the most, the ones that are most open and vulnerable with their gaps. I don't lose respect for those people. I gain respect for it. Anyway, massive tangent, but I get really passionate about that.
That's good.
So, and then anything else that I would share? Scrap your open door policies. This is my big hot take at the moment. Your open office, your open door policies doesn't create a welcoming environment. The way to have healthy, organic, family-style cultures is to have intentional one-on-ones and team meetings, not, hey, you can come and talk to me all the time. I've shared with my team, I may have an open door policy, but I don't have an open face policy. So maybe you need to work on that. I certainly do. But forget the idea that an open door policy is going to fix your culture and create a more environment filled with chemistry. It's just not. It's something you have to work really, really hard at and be intentional.
That could be a whole other podcast episode.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
Watch out, everyone. There's nothing easy about leading others, Matt. Let's just put that out there. Leadership is messy. But you said it already earlier in our conversation. So goes the leader, so goes the team. Healthy leaders lead healthy teams. And we both know the hardest person to lead isn't the one sitting across from you in the office. It's the one staring back at you in the mirror.
Right.
So, mate, what are some practical steps each of us can take to be more effective in leading ourselves well?
Ask your team for feedback. If you're brave, do it anonymously. I do this every single quarter. Every 3 months, I'll send them an anonymous survey to my boss, my colleagues, and my direct reports. And I'll say, what are my top 3 skills and what are my bottom 3 skills? And every quarter, when I receive the bottom 3, no one reads the top 3. Let's be honest. It's like, yeah, thank you for the compliment. I don't care, right? We go to the bottom 3, and every quarter I feel like I get punched in the gut. It's like, oof. Yes, I need to work on being more present. I need to work on processing things with people, not jumping to conclusions. Those aren't hypotheticals, by the way. I did receive those last quarter. And so every quarter I'm thinking to myself, well, I know I'm going to send this out again in 90 days. I'll be damned if the same thing turns up in 3 months. So I'm going to work my tail off to ensure that the same feedback doesn't turn up next time. So that would be my most practical piece of advice. Ask for feedback. If you've got an inner circle that you have a high degree of trust with, don't go anonymously. Sit down and have a coffee with them and say, hey, no reprisals, no consequences. Tell me what are the things that I'm doing that I'm not aware of that are causing dysfunction and potentially toxicity in the team. That would be my biggest piece of advice, and I think that's how we get better as leaders. If you're a preaching pastor, watch your game tape. That's the worst. When you're watching or listening to yourself and you start noticing, why am I doing that with my hand? And why do I touch my face? And how come I say and like and this a lot? That's how I've gotten better at just general presenting skills. So that would be the second little bonus thought.
That's great. I've heard, Matt, that you're a Kindle freak. And I think your yearly record on Kindle is 57 books or something like that?
Yeah, it's 57 last year. I'm hoping to beat it this year.
Wow. So what are a few books that you already alluded to one or two, but what are some others that you've read this year that you think every leader should check out and why?
If you haven't read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, highly recommend that. Radical Candor by Kim Scott is another personal favorite in terms of engaging in healthy conflict, not unhealthy conflict. Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg is a really good book. Working Genius, I'm just addicted to at the moment, which is the latest personality assessment, productivity assessment, I should say. And I'm learning so much about myself and my leaders by taking that test and seeing how that's lived out in every single meeting that we run. So that would be the most practical one, is if you can take the Working Genius and read that book, that would probably be very illuminating if you haven't.
How that affects how you lead meetings and the type of meetings you have is incredible.
I know.
I double exclamation mark that one, but there's a great list. There's some homework for our listeners. Yeah. Matt, we have so much respect for the work that you are doing and in and through Leadr to support leaders and grow and develop leaders. What's the best way for organizations, churches to get in contact with you?
Reach out to us at leadr.com. I've emphasized the R because Leadr sounds like with an A because of my terrible accent. So Leadr, Leadr.com, and you can reach out to us there. We'd love to get in touch with you and see how we can help you disciple your team better.
And hopefully people after listening to this conversation are going to be practicing their Australian and New Zealand accents.
Yeah, exactly.
They're the hardest ones to do. The worst thing is hearing us do an American accent, right?
Oh,
that's bad. That's bad.
The worst. Yeah, that's not going to make us any friends anytime soon.
No, it won't. Matt, it's been so good having you on today. I'm looking forward to a conversation again in the future. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim.
Friends, leadership is a journey. You're never done with it. We're always evolving as leaders, and the speed at which we evolve is equal to our openness to feedback and to growth opportunities. So I encourage you to lean into some of the things that Matt challenged us on today. It's also a journey for your team. So ask your team questions about how you can help them grow and how you can grow. Maybe you can think of another leader that would benefit from this conversation. Please consider sharing it and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks again. And until next time, stay curious and reach for the remarkable.